Hello everyone, my name is Jiang. I'm a senior research associate in School of Integrative Plant Science of Cornell University. In this presentation, I will be talking about the traceability analysis of transient carbon storage, which is a modification of the original traceability framework that relies on the assumption of steady state. Transient traceability analysis is particularly useful to address the origin and drivers of carbon flow of a system in a state of transition towards a new steady state, a transient system. I will illustrate how the transient traceability can be applied to address scientific questions with two examples. One tracks the differences in modeled carbon storage between two forest ecosystems, and the second compares model simulations of three model intercomparison projects, in short, MIPS. Each MIP involves multiple land carbon models. This is a study led by Chris Jones on land carbon changes simulated by Earth system models involved in CMIP-5. As we can see from this figure, these models generate very large uncertainty in land carbon storage. The spread of the simulated land carbon change across the models is even bigger than the spread across the four scenarios. Large uncertainty remains in CMIP-6 simulations. This figure shows the absolute amount and the change of soil and later carbon in panels A and B, and vegetation carbon in panels C and D, simulated by CMIP-6 models under 1% CO2 increase experiment. You can see the uncertainty across these models is still large, especially for soil and later carbon. Moving forward, a big challenge is how to reduce the uncertainty across models for more reliable predictions. Land carbon models became more and more complex in recent decades, with more processes incorporated. Although the complexity, most of the land carbon models share the same components as described in previous presentations. Because of this property, Jiang et al. Developed a traceability framework to decompose steady-state carbon storage into traceable components, which you have learned from his presentation and I'm not repeating here. However, most ecosystems are not at steady state due to climate change and other disturbances. The non-steady state is called transient state, and the challenge is how to trace transient carbon storage dynamics. To realize the traceability of transient carbon storage, Ichi led a theoretical analysis to extend the steady-state traceability framework to transient state by adding another term called carbon storage potential. This is the original equation on which the transient traceability is based. As you have seen this equation a few times in earlier presentations, I'm not repeating it again. In this equation, the combination of inverse A, K, and K is named as chasing time, which is a matrix of carbon residence time through the network of individual pools. It represents the time scale for the net carbon pool change to be redistributed in the network. The product of chasing time and the allocation coefficient B is residence time of individual pools in the network. The product of carbon residence time and carbon input is the maximum carbon that individual pools or the whole ecosystem can store at a time. We call it carbon storage capacity. The product of chasing time and carbon pool change, net carbon pool change on the right side represent redistribution of net change of individual pools in a network. This redistribution of net carbon pool change indicates the potential of an individual pool or the whole ecosystem to gain additional carbon or lose carbon. Therefore, we call it carbon storage potential. So we can derive another equation from above descriptions. That is, transient carbon storage equals carbon storage capacity minus carbon storage potential. This is the overall equation of the transient traceability. The first application of the transient traceability is to analyze carbon storage dynamic at Duke Forest and Harvard Forest. This work was co-led by Jiang and myself. I would also like to acknowledge our co-authors. We applied the transient traceability theory to decompose transient carbon storage into different components. We selected two forests. One is Duke Forest, which is evergreen needle-leaf forest. Another is Harvard Forest, which is deciduous broadleaf forest. There are measured data at both sites available for calibrating our model. This is the framework for transient traceability of land carbon storage dynamics. We can decompose transient carbon storage into carbon storage capacity and carbon storage potential. Carbon storage capacity is the product of NPP and carbon residence time. Carbon storage potential is the product of chasing time and net carbon pool change. Further, chasing time is jointly determined by environmental scalars, transfer coefficients, and exit rate. Carbon residence time is co-determined by environmental scalars, transfer coefficient, exit rate, and allocation coefficient. And environmental scalar can be derived from climate forcing. The model we used is the TICO model, with which you are now very familiar, so I would skip the details about this model. This is the flowchart showing the steps how we conducted this analysis. We first calibrated TICO model with GPP data from the two sites. Then we ran the TICO model to steady state by recycling 10 years forcing from 1850 to 1859. After that, we ran the model for forward simulation from 1850 to 2100. We output each component as mentioned in previous slide and calculate transient carbon storage, and we verified with the direct model output of transient carbon storage. This is the validation results of the TICO model. For both ecosystems, the model can capture the observed patterns pretty well. We compared direct model output of carbon storage with carbon storage calculated by the transient traceability framework. They are almost identical in both forests, which means the transient traceability framework works very well to reproduce model simulations. This figure shows transient carbon storage X, carbon storage capacity XC, and carbon storage potential XP over time. Red, orange, and pink lines are X, XC, and XP respectively in Harvard Forest. Light blue, black, and blue lines are X, XC, and XP respectively in Duke Forest. The trajectory of all three variables are similar between the two ecosystems, all increasing with time. Moreover, X closely tracks XC in both ecosystems, and XP only accounts for a very small proportion of X. The only difference is Harvard forest has higher X and XC than Duke forest. Panel B shows the change of the three variables over time, which are the average of the last 10 years carbon storage minus average of the first year carbon storage. The two components of carbon storage capacity, that is NPP and carbon residence time, are shown in panel A and panel B. NPP is very similar between the two ecosystems, but carbon residence time shows different trend. In Duke forest, carbon residence time increases over time, but in Harvard forest, carbon residence time decreases over time. Panel C here shows their change at the end of 21st century compared to 1850. Environmental scalars increase in both forests, which means less and less environmental limitations on carbon processes. Allocation coefficients show different trends between the two ecosystems. In Duke forest, B1, black line, which is allocation to leaf, and B3, blue line, which is allocation to root. Both decline with time, but B2, light blue line, which is allocation to wood, increases greatly. In Harvard forest, B1, orange line, which is allocation to leaf, and B2, red line, which is allocation to wood, both slightly increase, but B3, pink line, which is allocation to root, decreases. The substantial increase in B2, allocation to wood, in Duke forest may explain why carbon residence time in this ecosystem increases, because wood usually has longer residence time. Similarly, panel B shows the change by the end of 21st century. This figure shows that in both ecosystems, about 80% of carbon storage potential is determined by net ecosystem production. To summarize this application, the transient traceability framework can decompose modeled transient carbon storage into traceable components. It can help understand the mechanisms of modeled carbon dynamics in response to climate change in Duke forest and Harvard forest. Some potential applications that transient traceability framework may have. It can be used to address how other global change factors, such as land use change, affect carbon storage dynamics. When it's applied in different ecosystem models or global land models, it can help identify the differences across ecosystems or biomes. It can also be used in model intercomparison projects to identify the sources of uncertainty among models and therefore can help reduce uncertainty. Next, I will be talking about the application to model intercomparison projects. The second application of the transient traceability is to identify sources of uncertainty in modeled land carbon storage within and across 3 MIPS. This work was conducted by Xia Zhou and her co-authors. The specific question they asked is how to track the sources of uncertainty in modeled land carbon storage within and across 3 MIPS. The 3 MIPS include CMIP 5, Trendy, and MISMIP. The 3 techniques they used are carbon storage dynamic decomposition, traceability analysis of carbon storage dynamics, and attribution analysis of carbon storage dynamics. The transient traceability analysis of carbon storage at Duke Forest and Harvard Forest, introduced earlier, is called full transient traceability analysis. That is, the modeled differences of carbon storage among ecosystems or among models can be traced back to differences in respective components in the overall equation I mentioned earlier, and finally can be traced back to individual processes or parameters in the models. However, the application of full transient traceability analysis to MIPS requires much time to figure out the structures and parameterizations of all involved models in order to record them in matrix form. Due to the challenge in acquiring all details of the involved models, Zhou et al. Applied the transient traceability framework in combination with another technique, variance decomposition. We call this kind of analysis post-MIP transient traceability analysis to be distinguished from the full transient traceability analysis. They first decomposed modeled transient carbon storage into a 3D model output space. Carbon storage equals carbon storage capacity minus carbon storage potential. Carbon storage capacity is a product of carbon residence time and carbon input. The 3D model output space refers to carbon residence time, NPP, and carbon storage potential. This is the flowchart of the traceability analysis. Overall, it's very similar with the first application. They traced carbon residence time back to baseline carbon residence time and environmental scalars, as shown in the equation. Slightly different from the first application, they traced NPP back to baseline NPP and environmental scalars, as shown in the equation. The third technique is attribution analysis of carbon storage dynamics, which is a variance decomposition method. The left part shows the three-step to attribute carbon storage capacity, carbon residence time, and NPP to their components. The right side shows the equations for each step. I will not go to much details. Here only shows equations for carbon residence time, but NPP is the same. The three MIPs are CMIP5, Trendy, and MISMIP. For CMIP5, they used 9 models under historical simulations. For Trendy, they used 9 models under S2 simulations, and there are 7 models for MISMIP and S3 simulations. This analysis was conducted at global scale and at annual time step. Here come the results. The top 3 panels show 3D model output space. Each panel is 1 MIP. X-axis is NPP, Y-axis is carbon residence time, and the contour lines are carbon storage capacity. Carbon storage potential is represented by the color as shown in the bar on the right. We can see models differ a lot in carbon residence time, NPP, and carbon storage potential. Usually within each model, the range of carbon residence time is much smaller than NPP. In addition, NPP in those models with a coupled nitrogen cycle, for example, CESM BGC and non-ESM in CMIP5, and CLM4, CLM4 weak, SM and DLM in MISMIP, is lower than models without a coupled nitrogen cycle. Carbon residence time and NPP show smaller variations across the 9 dynamic global vegetation models in trendy in comparison to those models in CMIP5 and MISMIP. As a result, the variations in carbon storage capacity in trendy are not as large as in CMIP5 and MISMIP. Global carbon storage over time are shown in the bottom 3 panels. Each panel is 1 MIP. The solid lines are transient carbon storage. The shaded outlines indicate carbon storage capacity, and shadings shows carbon storage potential. The global carbon storage and carbon storage capacity vary substantially across these models. The large range of carbon storage across these models is related to that of carbon storage capacity. The interannual trend of carbon storage in the models are mainly affected by carbon storage potential, because the sign and magnitude of carbon storage potential determine the direction and the rate of carbon storage change respectively. The interannual variability of carbon storage in trendy is much smaller than in CMIP5 and MISMIP. Carbon residence time is further traced to baseline carbon residence time and environmental scalars. Similarly, NPP is traced back to baseline NPP and environmental scalars. The baseline carbon residence time and baseline NPP among the models in the 3 MIPs can differ as much as threefold. In contrast, the environmental scalars are more convergent among the models for both carbon residence time and NPP, indicating that the large differences in carbon residence time and NPP across models are caused by the differences in their baseline carbon residence time and baseline NPP, not much due to the environmental scalars. Finally, by adopting a variance decomposition method, they quantify the relative contribution of each component to the simulated global carbon storage for each MIP and for all the 3 MIPs together. The results revealed that variations in transient carbon storage are dominated by carbon residence time and NPP. Carbon storage potential only contributes less than 1%. Moreover, baseline carbon residence time and baseline NPP contribute more than 90% to the variations in carbon residence time and NPP respectively. In contrast, the contributions by temperature and water scalars to the variations in carbon residence time and NPP are both less than 5%. As a consequence, the variations in simulated transient carbon storage across the models can be primarily attributed to the differences in models' baseline carbon residence time and baseline NPP. The post-MIP approach adopted by Zhou et al. Is a novel approach, providing an alternative way to understand the causes of the uncertainty among models when full traceability analysis is not able to be realized due to the effort required to get detailed information on original models. Such post-MIP traceability analysis can be automatically run with a public platform, TraceMe, which is an online traceability analysis system for model evaluation on land carbon dynamics. While post-MIP traceability analysis offers useful insight, it will be more helpful to apply the full traceability analysis to MIPS to trace specific model components and assumptions that dominate model uncertainty. To summarize these two applications, the transient traceability framework can help identify the causes why ecosystems differ in their responses to climate change, or why models differ in their simulations. Once we know where the models don't agree with each other, we can then use observational data to determine which models are more accurate than others. That is the focus of benchmark analysis, which will be introduced in the next lecture. The goal of the transient traceability framework is to help improve model performance for more reliable predictions and to enhance our understanding how terrestrial ecosystems respond to environmental changes. That's all. Thank you for your attention. Please contact me if you have any questions.